In January 2024, the UFC fan base lost one of its champions, and regrettably, it was the heavyweight king himself, the Predator, Francis Ngannou, once considered the next big star of the division. Something happened between Francis Ngannou and Dana White, and the professional relationship never recovered.
I noticed Mick Maynard put the belt on you and not Dana. Was that at your request? You didn't want Dana to do that, or why did that happen?
I don't know. You have to ask him.
Despite rounds and rounds of negotiations, the two sides never came to an agreement, and the clock kept ticking. The heavyweight division stuck in a lockjam. In the end, Francis rejected the contract offer to him, vacated his belt, and moved on entirely.
We offered Francis a deal that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in the history of the company. More than Lesnar, more than anybody. And he turned the deal down.
Considering his recent deal with PFL, Francis did what was right for him, and more power to the guy. But UFC fans are left with yet another haunting question. What if by some miracle, Dana White and Francis and gone, who had reached an agreement and the Predator was still a part of the roster? In some alternate universe out there, January 2024 was the day to rejoice, and spoiler alert, here is how it all went down. It is January 2024, and the lineal heavyweight king, Francis Ngannou, and the Top Fight promotion have come to a deal after a full year of intense negotiations. This contractual saga was littered with controversy and animosity, but thankfully sanity prevailed over ego, and the undisputed baddest man on the planet was back where he belonged. This miracle came together at the last minute, and while the heavyweight division rotted in limbo as a consequence, the next step was obvious and already inked and official the moment Francis Ngannou defeated Stipe Miocic. A certain someone was on Twitter, and now that certain someone was going to get what he wanted.
Because you would be afraid to fight Francis doesn't mean I would be afraid to fight Francis.
Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones had been brewing for a while. Ever since Jones vacated his light heavyweight title, the MMA fandom was hopeful that he would finally move up to heavyweight and test himself against fighters his own size.
Heavyweight, right? This is what everyone wants. They want to see you go to heavyweight. What are the chances, if all goes well on February 8th, that your next fight is at heavyweight?
There's a really good chance.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Shortly after announcing that Francis would remain a part of the organization, the UFC ignited the MMA world when it announced the biggest heavyweight clash in history. Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones for the undisputed heavyweight championship at UFC 285. The first fight on his new contract, and Francis was already at a crossroad, a pivotal point in his professional career, as his future hinged upon the result of the championship fight.
I think Jon beats everybody.
There's not a man on this planet who beats Jon Jones.
Wow. He got what he wanted from the UFC, but the animosity lingered, and a loss to Jones was sure to cripple his UFC career for good and make his professional life a hail without the championship belt. Francis Ngannou was nothing to Dana White but a victory over the consensus greatest fighter of all time, and Dana White himself would have to swallow his ego for the sake of good business. One of the most anticipated and important fights in UFC history is upon us. Considering the stakes involved, the storyline branches out to two completely different timelines, because the heavyweight clash at UFC 285 is more than just a championship fight. It is a continuation of the bigger picture, the feud between Francis Ngannou and Dana White himself. What if? The inevitable occurs at UFC 285, and Jon Jones does what all expect him to: capture the heavyweight title and cement himself as a distant number one in the MMA sphere. The red carpet is rolled out, and the entire MMA world bows in surrender as Jones is crowned the baddest man on the planet, a title he always deserved, but now at UFC 285 it was official.
The champ is here, the champ is back, the GOAT is here, the GOAT has arrived. I mean, that was unbelievable, right? We all know Jon Jones is great. We all knew the wrestling was a threat.
The entire MMA world sings this praises. Dana White spends the whole post-fight press conference detailing just how incredible
Throughout
Jon...
the years, you've been pretty vocal in saying that your belief that Jon is arguably the greatest of all time.
But if there is any debate out there, that would definitely be the end of it. I mean, realistically, when you look at at John's career. He's undefeated. He should be 27-0 right now.
But during the Jon Jones Ascension ceremony, former champion lies defeated and forgotten. Nobody even bats an eye at him, and when he does come into view, they laugh. He was defeated by a light heavyweight, a guy who was 40 pounds lighter. It was over for him, and Dana White would make sure of that upon losing the fight. Francis Ngannou, who lost the only edge he had in the war against Dana White, and now defeated in front of millions and without the title. Francis was at the mercy of the corporate machinery, the same entity he had pissed off before. His new contract was rendered worthless, and Dana White, now unhinged and unrestrained, decides to make an example out of the former champion for the rest of his UFC career. The Predator is kept away from the title. He is cursed forever no matter how much he wins or how impressively he knocks people out. That one loss on the biggest stage hangs over his head. He has to stomach constant disrespect from the boss. Until the very end, one day it is announced that the Predator, the scariest dude in heavyweight history, was released from the promotion, and Dana White sends him off in his own special way.
I know there's been a lot of talk about Francis Ngannou. Is there anything that can happen under the sun, Dana? If it's Francis apologizing, is there anything that can happen that could bring him back into the fold?
I'm not interested in being. I tried to make that fight for 2 years. He didn't want the fight. A lot of other people feel this way. You know, I think that's exactly the way the fight would have gone if he was in there too.
A tragic end, but what if?
Man, the idea of a Jon Jones fight seems awfully exciting right now. And Jon came out, tweeted, said, "Show me the money."
If I'm Jon Jones and I'm home watching this fight, I start moving to 85.
In the clash of the unstoppable force and the immovable object, the touch of oblivion was just too much to endure, even for the greatest combatant of all time.
Francis Ngannou is scary. You know, there's a big chance that he could break my jaw.
Nobody was able to process the sight at first, as Jon Jones, the untouchable phenom, was sent crashing to the ground unconscious and defeated. After years and years of absolute domination, the dynasty of Jones had crumbled. The man to finally hand him defeat was Francis Ngannou, and that name is immortalized for the rest of time. Defeating Jon Jones was one insane feat, but Ngannou would not just be the greatest fighter of all time. On the night of UFC 285, he defeated the UFC, and Dana White was nowhere to be seen in the aftermath.
I actually walked out of the arena right after the co-main event because there was stuff going on backstage that I was dealing with.
Already considered one of the most fearsome fighter in UFC history, Francis Ngannou was sent to a whole new level after beating Jon Jones, and his popularity exploded, further complicating Dana White's job. Still champion of the world and the first guy to defeat Jones, Francis Ngannou was suddenly the biggest superstar in heavyweight history, and against all odds, he had become one of the most valuable athletes in the combat sports world. Dana Red was cited a few weeks after, and when asked about his thoughts about the historic heavyweight fight, the UFC boss had no choice but to admit Francis Ngannou was the best in the world.
Yeah, no, he looked damn good. He looked incredible, man, and obviously you saw a lot of things from him tonight that we hadn't seen from him in the past. Head kicks, leg kicks, really good grappling, takedown defense, scary.
And Dana White was looking at a brutal negotiation session in the near future when victory was all that Francis needed to push the corporation to a point never before, and for a short period of time, the Predator transcended the sport, and his demands just had to be fulfilled. There was just no way the UFC could afford to lose the baddest men alive. In the next year, Tyson Fury vs. Francis Ngannou was co-promoted by the Boxing Federation and the UFC itself.
Francis Ngannou, Big Mush, I'm your daddy. I'm the daddy, me. I'm the baddest man on the planet, and I'll give you the best hiding you've ever had, you big dosser. Sign the contract, you big stiff idiot.
Such an outrageous exception was allowed only once before for Conor McGregor himself, but unlike the Irishman, Francis was not the favorite of the corporation. He simply knocked everyone out, including Jon Jones, and left the UFC with no other option but to concede. The change Francis had promised was upon them, and all it took was one win. It takes one victory at the right place at the right time against the right opponent, and all bends to your will. UFC 285 was that place. The main event was the time and Jon Jones was the perfect opponent. Somewhere in the distant corner of reality, the UFC fan base witnessed all this, and another chapter was written in the history book. A brutal fall from grace or the ultimate triumph that sparked the change in the industry. It all hinged upon the main event of UFC 285. Having gone through it all, pity, we were never able to witness either of these scenarios. Francis Ngannou taking on Jon Jones would have been one of the biggest fights in UFC history, and considering it was on the line, the result, victory or defeat for Francis, could have altered the UFC for years to come. Now wake up, none of that happened, and you just have to accept it. Hope you enjoyed this video. This was a new concept, and depending on the reception, we might explore a few other alternate realities. There are just so many. That being said, I gotta bounce. Catch you all in the next one. Peace out.